In April this year, a cargo ship carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans departed from Argentina and arrived at China's Tianjin port after more than 10 days. However, the shipment was rejected by Chinese authorities. Shortly after, China Customs released a statement expressing concerns that the soybeans, labeled as originating from Argentina, may have actually come from the United States. This incident drew international attention, raising questions about why US soybeans would be re-exported through Argentina and how China determined the soybeans' origin. If you enjoy our video content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss our latest updates. Now let's dive into today's topic. Whenever Donald Trump has been elected President of the United States, he has taken a tough stance on China, and this term has been no exception. In February 2025, Trump announced a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. By April 10th, the total tariff rate imposed by the US on Chinese goods had risen significantly. In response, Beijing introduced its own measures. On February 10th, China imposed a 15% tariff on US coal and liquefied natural gas, and a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, large vehicles, and pickup trucks. China also imposed export controls on certain key metals, including tungsten, tellurium, molybdenum, bismuth, and indium. On March 3rd, China extended tariffs to additional US products, including a 15% tariff on chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton, and a 10% tariff on sorghum, pork, beef, seafood, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. However, today's discussion focuses specifically on China suspending purchases of soybeans produced in the United States. China, with a population of around 1.4 billion, has a high demand for food. Although the country is largely self-sufficient in its three main staple crops, rice, wheat, and corn, domestic soybean production is insufficient to meet demand. In 2024, China's total soybean output was around 20.62 million tons, which fell short of market needs. To meet growing domestic demand, China imports about 150 million tons of grain annually, with soybeans representing a significant portion. For example, in 2024, China imported a total of 157 million tons of grain, at a cost of approximately $50.8 billion USD. Of this, soybean imports accounted for 105 million tons, roughly 66% of total grain imports. In other words, for every 100 yuan spent on grain imports, over 70 yuan went towards soybeans. Historically, China has relied heavily on Brazil and the United States for soybean imports. In 2024, China imported over 74 million tons from Brazil, valued at nearly $26.9 billion USD, making up close to 70% of its soybean imports. The United States was China's second largest source, providing over 22 million tons, costing nearly $9 billion USD. Thanks to Argentina's significant soybean production and competitive pricing, it has also become a key supplier to China. According to available data, in 2022, China purchased nearly 3 million tons of soybeans from Argentina in a single month, approaching the total 2021 volume of 3.75 million tons. By 2024, China had imported 4.118 million tons of soybeans from Argentina at an average price of $374 per ton. In the first 2 months of 2025 alone, China had imported 120,000 tons from Argentina, continuing the trend from previous years. This year, soybean imports are expected to surpass the total amount imported from Argentina in 2024. Many major soybean producers in Argentina remain optimistic about the Chinese market. However, in April of this year, Chinese customs unexpectedly rejected a shipment of 300,000 tons of soybeans from Argentina, stating that they suspected the actual origin was not Argentina, but the United States. As mentioned earlier, the United States is the world's second largest soybean producer, with around 112 million tons produced in 2022. Soybean farming in the US covers more than 30 million hectares, mainly in agricultural states such as Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. The peak year for US soybean exports was 2016, with a total export volume of 58.23 million tons, of which 36.1 million tons went to China, about 62% of total US soybean exports and 30% of its total production. By 2024, US soybean production had decreased from 119 million tons to 100 million tons. Meanwhile, China's imports from the US dropped from 36.1 million tons to 22.12 million tons, a reduction of nearly 14 million tons. This decline roughly corresponds with the 19 million ton drop in US production during the same period. Part of the context for this situation includes increased tariffs that were reimposed during the Trump administration. Currently, US tariffs on Chinese goods are significantly high, reportedly up to 25%, which has severely impacted normal trade between the two countries. Under these conditions, US soybean exports have slowed. Given that China remains the world's largest soybean importer, some exporters have allegedly sought alternative methods to maintain access to the Chinese market. In one case in April, a ship carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans arrived at a Chinese port, with documentation and packaging indicating that the soybeans originated in Argentina. On the surface, this appeared to be standard international trade. However, during routine inspection, customs officers noticed inconsistencies. The soybeans' protein content was unusually high, 35.1%, whereas Argentine soybeans typically do not exceed 34%, based on regional growing conditions. Further inspection revealed that the transport sacks used were labeled as made in the United States, raising further questions. These findings led Chinese authorities to conclude that the soybeans were likely from the US, not Argentina. As a result, the entire shipment was rejected and returned according to regulations. This incident was not the first of its kind. In an earlier case in 2024, another shipment of 200,000 tons of soybeans labeled as Argentine also drew suspicion. Despite complete documentation, Chinese customs staff identified the soybeans as likely originating from the US Midwest within 48 hours. Chinese customs reportedly used a range of techniques to verify the origin of the soybeans, including GPS, tracking of shipping routes, protein content analysis, and high-precision mass spectrometry. By comparing 12 technical indicators, they were able to determine the true origin of the soybeans. In 2024, China Customs completed a major upgrade of its AI traceability system, reportedly achieving an identification accuracy rate of up to 98%. For example, Shanghai Customs successfully intercepted several cases of false origin labeling using this enhanced system.